Hello everyone, this is topic 47, the acquisition of lexicon and its teaching implications. Introduction. In this topic there shall be a look at lexical acquisition and an examination of the different techniques used in the classroom. The focus shall also be on the selection of texts and whether authentic or non-authentic material should be used. If language structures make up the skeleton of language, then it is vocabulary that provides the vital organs and the flesh. In other words, an ability to manipulate grammatical structure does not have any potential for expressing meanings unless words are used. In real life, it's even possible that where vocabulary is used correctly, it can cancel out structural inaccuracy. For example, when a student says, "I've seen him yesterday," they're committing one of the most notorious mistakes when it comes to tense in English, but they will still be understood because of the word yesterday. Grammatical knowledge allows us to generate sentences, but at the same time, we must have something to say. We must have meanings that we wish to express, and we need to have a store of words from which we can select what we want to say. For many years, vocabulary was seen as incidental to the main purpose of language teaching, namely the acquisition of grammatical knowledge. Vocabulary was necessary to give students something to hang on to when learning structures, but it was frequently not a main focus for language learning itself. Recently, however, methodologists and linguists have increasingly been turning their attention to vocabulary, stressing its importance in language teaching and reassessing some of the ways in which it is taught and learned. It is now clear, for example, that the acquisition of vocabulary is just as important as the acquisition of grammar, and teachers should have the same kind of expertise in the teaching of vocabulary as they do in the teaching of structure. Selecting vocabulary. Part of the challenge in teaching vocabulary lies in the fact that whereas there's a consensus about what grammatical structures should be taught at what level, the same is hardly true of vocabulary. Therefore, one of the problems of vocabulary teaching is how to select what words to teach. A general principle in the past has been to teach more concrete words at lower levels and gradually become more abstract. Other criteria, which are rather more scientific, have been used, amongst which two of the most important are frequency and coverage. We may decide which words to use and which words we should teach on the basis of how frequently they are used by speakers of the language. The words which are most commonly used are the ones we should teach first, obviously. Another principle that has been used is that one of coverage. That is, a word is more useful if it covers more things than if it only just covers one specific meaning. These two principles would suggest that a word like book that would be an early vocabulary item, and it is frequently used by native speakers, and it has a greater cover than other terms such as textbook, exercise book, notebook, and so on and so forth. Apart from frequency of the word, other factors come into play. Do the students need to know these words yet? How useful is it for them? And how well does it fit into the topics, functions, structures, and situations that we want to teach? The decision about what vocabulary to teach and learn will be heavily influenced by information that we can get about the frequency in use. However, this information will be assessed in the light of other considerations such as the topic, the structure, the needs and wants of the students, etc. What do students need to know? It is clear that there is far more to a vocabulary item than just its meaning. In this sense, we must decide what we're going to teach. The meaning first, then the spelling and the pronunciation, the word use, the word grammar, the word formation. By being aware of this, students will be more receptive to the contextual behavior of words when they first see them in texts, and they will be better able to manipulate both the meanings and forms of the word. Teaching vocabulary. A distinction is frequently made between active and passive vocabulary. The former refers to vocabulary that students have learnt or been taught and which they are expected to be able to use, whereas the latter refers to words which the students will recognize but which they will probably not be able to produce. Nevertheless, the status of a vocabulary item does not seem to be a permanent state of affairs. In fact, a word that has been active through constant use may slip back into the passive store if it's not used. Similarly, a word that students have in the passive store may suddenly become active if the situation or the context provokes its use. Experiments in vocabulary seem to suggest that students remember best when they have actually done something with the words they are learning. In this sense, there's a definite advantage in getting students to do more than just repeat vocabulary items. Tasks such as changing words to mean their opposites, making a noun an adjective, putting words together, etc. can help to fix the words in the learner's minds. Somehow or other, it seems that students should be a bit forced to interact with words. We should get them to adopt words that they like and that they want to use, and we should encourage them to do things with words so that they become properly acquainted with them. The bottom line is that vocabulary learning needs the deep experience. Teaching techniques. Presentation techniques. There are many occasions when some form of presentation and/or explanation is the best way to bring new words into the classroom, and here are some examples. Something that must be remembered with vocabulary presentation is that pronunciation is just as important as it is for structural material. Words should not be introduced without making sure that students know how they're said. There are a number of ways of presenting the sound of words, through modeling, through visual representation, or through phonetic symbols. Discovery techniques. Discovery techniques where students have to work out rules and meanings for themselves rather than being given everything by the teacher are an appropriate alternative to presentation techniques which are more standard. Discovery techniques used with vocabulary materials also allow students to activate their previous knowledge and share what they know. In this sense, it is often a good idea to have students working in pairs or in groups, because frequently a word that is unknown to one student will be known by another. Practice techniques. Once a new word has been taught, presented, discovered, it should be practiced, obviously. In this sense, the teacher needs to think about ways to use the word in a less restricted manner. Ideas here would include role-playing, group work, where the students are placed in a situation where the words may arise, for example in a shop, in a restaurant. For the lower levels, games are a good way to help them to vocalize the words. The teacher can use games such as crosswords, hangman, etc. Other activities to practice the use of the language include riddles, songs, gap fills. Still, there are many other techniques which are not going to be mentioned here. Yet what's important to highlight is that the ultimate aim is to present the new words in such a way as to ensure that students can remember them, giving them plenty of opportunity for practice. Text selection. In the last 2 decades, the communicative approach has clearly replaced more traditional methods in the teaching of the English language. The advocates of this approach favour the use of real English in real situations, and therefore expect the learners of any L2 to be able to use the target language in real contexts. Authentic material. Authentic texts were defined as those which were designed for native speakers. They were real texts designed not for language students, but for the speakers of the language in question. Consequently, anything a native speaker of English would hear or read or use can be described as authentic. Theatre programs, magazines, newspapers. Authentic materials are obviously not graded for level, although some are obviously more difficult to understand than others. Therefore, teachers should select the material carefully with the needs and interests of the students in mind, and also decide what the students are going to do with the material. As a result, the same piece of authentic material may be used at different levels. An easy task can be set for lower levels and more difficult for higher level students. Non-authentic material. A non-authentic text in language teaching terms is one that has been written specially for language students. These texts sometimes concentrate on the language we wish to teach. There are a number of clues which can show us that the language used in this type of material is artificial. For example, the speakers use perfectly formed sentences all the time, and we all know that's not the case. The language is extremely unvaried, and the aim is to isolate bits of language so the students can concentrate on them way better. Such material is very useful for teaching structures, but they should not be used to help students become better listeners or readers. Simulated authentic material. So in addition to the two previous types of written materials, we can also consider a third type called simulated authentic material. This material is specially prepared for students of English since it attempts to reproduce the authentic written or spoken English. The authors of this material roughly tune the language and content to suit the students' needs, but they do not sacrifice the feel of the language. What's being suggested, therefore, is that the material must at least simulate authenticity. The need for language control at lower levels must not be used as an excuse for extreme artificiality. Arguments for using authentic materials. So in modern methodology, it seems to be a must to use authentic material in the English language lesson. It is important to realize that teachers must make their own selection from course books, although writers and publishers will argue that the material they include in their books is the best for learners of English since it's being prepared by specialists. Therefore, apart from following a course book, teachers should feel like introducing certain novelties, because they know not only the students and the level of proficiency, but also their needs, their weaknesses, the strong points. As a result, they're perfectly able to select the most appropriate material to be used in class. Using authentic material in the classroom, even when it's not done in an authentic situation, provided it is appropriately exploited, is significant for many reasons, amongst which students are exposed to real discourse. These materials are going to keep the students informed about what's happening in the real world. The language change is reflected in the materials, and they can encourage reading for pleasure, among many other advantages. Arguments against using authentic material. Nonetheless, there might also be some considerations against the use of authentic material in the English teaching, such as they may be too culturally biased, which makes the material too difficult to understand outside the language community. The vocabulary might not be relevant for the students, and if too many structures are mixed in the same text, it can be a bit frustrating for lower level students especially. In conclusion, in this topic, we've seen the importance of vocabulary within the system of language, and we've also outlined the main features guiding its learning and teaching. What remains clear is that if we provide the right kind of exposure to words for the students, and if we provide opportunities for students to practice these words, then there's a good chance that students will learn and remember a considerable amount of them. The factors that are crucial in selecting the vocabulary to be taught or learned are those least easily controlled, such as the relevance of a word to an individual's immediate wants, needs and interests, the impact on their effect on first few encounters, and the number of opportunities to bring it into active use. As regards the texts to use, what we need are texts which students can understand the general meaning of, whether they are truly authentic or not. But texts must at all times be realistic models of written or spoken English. If teachers can find genuinely authentic material which their students can cope with, that will be advantageous. If not, they should be using material which at least simulates authentic English. So ultimately, we should encourage students to be able to deal with authentic reading material that any native speaker would find in real life. Where this is not possible, we should at least make some attempts to select tasks that approximate those we might do in real life. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out the other topics, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. and I'll see you in the next one.